everyone, and welcome back to our Public and International Service Advisor Training Workshop Week. My name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. While APSIA itself is the community for graduate schools worldwide that specialize in international affairs, I'm also very proud that we are the home of the Public and International Service Advisor Network for all of you who are in those critical undergraduate and community college advising student-facing roles. We've been delighted to welcome you to our earlier sessions looking at careers in international affairs and graduate school in international affairs, and today's wonderful conversation that I know we're going to have about how local and global issues connect and the different kinds of opportunities your students may be able to tap into to do global work at the local level, to support local initiatives through the global lens. We have some wonderful alumni here from different APSIA programs to speak with you, and I'll turn the floor over to our moderator, David Fletcher, in just 1 minute, but I would be remiss if I didn't extend some really deep thanks to the folks who make this event possible. First, to my colleague, Brittany Chor, for all of her very hard work setting up these workshops. To the sponsors who invest in this event, particularly the Robertson Foundation for Government and our counterparts at NASPA and APAM, and of course to all of you for joining us here today and for the earlier sessions that you've been able to attend. I also hope you'll join us tomorrow for our final session of the training week that looks most specifically at what APSIA does and how we hope to make your life as advisors a little bit easier with the tools and the resources and the events and opportunities that we provide. And so I invite you, if you have questions or things you really want us to address, please put those in the chat. You have some great speakers whose brains you can pick and who have wonderful experiences to share with you. And if you have any technical issues, please feel free to send me a direct message or Brittany a direct message, and we'll do our best to sort you out as soon as we can. And now with that, David, please, the floor is yours, and I look forward to a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Carmen. It's a wonderful privilege to be here with this exceptional panel to talk about linking global phenomena to local opportunities. As those of you in the audience are career advisors for undergraduate students, I'm going to give my viewpoint. I get a lot of parents, families, students that come in and they say, what do I do with international relations? I don't know what international relations is. You know, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a business person. What can you tell these folks about a career besides working perhaps at the Peace Corps, Department of State, USAID, the usual suspects? So what are the career options to be a globalist? Who tackles important issues while working here in the US? Why is it important? How do we link these things? And how can I do this? These are the things that I get asked. And these are the things we're going to pose to our panelists. So I would like to introduce our three speakers. We have Holly Hickling, Executive Director for the Global Switchboard. Please look at her bio. She is a University of Pittsburgh alumna. We have Tyler Vogel, Impact Program Manager for Community Reinvestment Fund. It also goes by CRF. He is an alum of the University of Minnesota. And we have Mary Intima, President and CEO of World Boston, a Johns Hopkins University alumna. So these three speakers will be giving us expert information on their careers, on their organizations, on their take on global issues made local. Let me go over for just a second our format today. We're starting now, and we will run until about 4:35 or so with question and answers that I'm going to pose to our panel. You are welcome to start putting questions into the chat. Please, if you don't ask questions, you won't get the information you need. So please be thinking of things you want to ask and get started. If you could turn on your camera, but please mute your microphone. We love to hear from you, but not while the panel is answering questions. And with that, let's get started. So I want to begin by asking a few questions to our panel. And this is open to anyone to start. Otherwise, if you guys all start talking at once, I'm going to make it alphabetical. So what connects local and global issues? This is a big topic. This is our topic today. And if I can break that into two parts, the first part, what global issues impact local concerns or matters, and what local issues impact global concerns or matters. I'm going to throw it out there. Can you help us with that?
I'll take a stab at it because the
Thank you, Mary.
slogan of World Boston is the world in Boston and Boston in the world. And we see not only that it's an arc, but a continuous loop. And I was thinking about this session the other day. This is a little bit niche, but Watertown is a suburb, a couple of towns over from Boston. It historically has a big Armenian diaspora. And recently a church there was defaced with statements about this region, Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh, hate speech. Now, that is like super niche, but what that's about is disputed territory between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I mean, thousands and thousands of miles away. But somebody, and I bet they didn't read about it in Foreign Affairs, somebody in that neighborhood knows about these issues, either to mark up the church or attending the church and knows what it means. So I just thought that kind of, that tells us more logically, that tells us a lot. More logically, I think, Americans, if many of us have traveled abroad, we can seem very isolated and insulated because we do have, two enormous oceans, and we're, to the south and to the north, very friendly borders. So we always hear, God, you people don't know anything about international affairs when we travel abroad, right? So I think that the ways that most Americans connect with international affairs, number one, and growing, is immigration. Possibly the big issue for the next presidential election. Number two always is trade, although that can be very elusive and complicated to understand. Hello, SICE. And number three, I would say, is for those Americans who participate in it, maybe national security, because they may serve in the military, but that's a tiny portion of us. So I would say immigration first, second, trade.
Wonderful. Tyler or Holly?
I can jump in real quick here. I would say also, when I kind of hear local to global, I think Mary did an amazing job of providing that overlay of kind of the macro themes, but I think it really interconnects with a lot of entrepreneurship and community issues that are found at a local level. I think now more than ever in a post-COVID world, we are seeing kind of these one-for-one fixes of problems that are affecting where I live in Minneapolis, is also affecting Munich, Germany, or Belize City and Belize. And I think that type of connection, which is now a huge part, is something that a lot of students are gravitating towards to try to see how they can solve issues in their communities and what it means to work across kind of those boundaries. And I think that is something that's just an incredible opportunity for students. And I think the recognition of that is really paired with understanding communities and leveraging those viewpoints. So community-led development, human-centered design. So I'll just leave it there, but I think that's an important component of this as well.
Thank you. Holly, anything to contribute as well?
Sure. Yeah. The first thing that came to my mind when you asked the question was human rights. And that's partially because the mission of my organization is about helping people collaborate around human rights. And I think a lot of times we and our students, when you think about human rights, you think about human rights abuses in other countries, like, oh, they're torturing women over here or whatever. But if you look at the UN Declaration of Human Rights, housing is a human right, healthcare is a human right. And these are things that we're advocating for locally. And that, they're things that are global world peace kind of issues, but that you can use at a local level. Like, you have your global understanding of what this means, but you can use it at a local level at your city to be like, housing is a human right, and why do we have so many unhoused people, or why is there no affordable student housing? And I'm taking out, the majority of student loans that I'm taking out are for room and board. So there's plenty of like local advocacy issues that are related to international relations. I want to just rolling off of what Mary said on the immigration piece. I feel like I don't want to get too political here, but on the immigration piece, from an international relations perspective, when we're looking at wars and different kinds of like sanctions and aggressions and even climate change that is causing global migration, that is like we have these macro issues that are causing migrants, undocumented, or, people coming into our communities for all different reasons. And so you have these macro things you can advocate about, like, oh, how about a diplomatic end to the war in Ukraine? But also you can open up your doors of your home to Ukrainian refugees, or, you can be tutoring, or you can be making your communities like a big thing we're working on is language access. You could find out, how do you call it, how do you get an interpreter? And so there's this macro with the micro, and for me, everything is global. Like everything we do is global, and everything we do, it's easier to do on a local level. So hopefully that makes sense. The other big thing that came to mind besides human rights, two big sides of immigration, the other thing I think about is climate change. And how, just working on climate change locally can have global effects when you think about the communities that are suffering the most and the communities that are polluting the most. But I'll stop there.
Hello, Mr. Johnson. This is Pamela Hurd in Honors. How you doing today? Doing fine. I was calling because
Sorry about that. So thank you all. I have the second part of our question. Can students work on international issues in their communities, in your communities, in Boston, in Minneapolis, in Pittsburgh, and how and where? I'll throw that out again.
Okay, I'm always a chatterbox. There's some obvious things that, like Holly was alluding to. Certainly working with immigrants is a very clear way to work on international relations. I would be remiss if I didn't note the art and science of citizen diplomacy. My organization hosts about 90 incoming delegations every year, and we always need we call it dinner diplomacy hosts. We need interlocutors. We don't do that much with youth, but certainly college students. So that is a really special thing. The public diplomacy is a real innovation, actually, of the United States that has caught on, and it has been super popular for about 80 years. That is a great way to plug in, maybe not affect the world in the way that, say, working with immigrants does, but to advance your education in a way that a textbook never can.
Thank you, Mary.
Jump in real quick. So a little background on CRF. We're a community development finance institution. And so what that basically means is it's functions similar to a nonprofit bank, but trying to kind of fill the gaps that exist. I think one person role in that I work with through CRF and my community in Minneapolis is trying to bridge a lot of organizations that help leverage technical assistance and help provide more of those access and technology and research gaps needed for folks to help with entrepreneurship or affordable housing. And I think there's a huge network of these support organizations that exist in every community, and a lot of them are kind of large spread. But I think in Minneapolis, there's an amazing organization called Copal That's a Minnesota chapter. I mean, these are just, they bridge the gap mostly between like environmental justice issues and are very hyper localized of trying to identify problems in the community. But by that kind of functionality, they are allies with community groups all over, whether it's indigenous ways of knowing, and you really cast a stone in any sort of large community here and find these type of archetypal organizations. And as an amazing entry point for young people trying to kind of get engaged and learn what are the problems in my community and what does that mean just broader? How are these organizing together to be champions, whether it's climate justice, economic justice, human rights? So those are just a few examples there.
Thank you.
I definitely echo what the other two said. And there's definitely an organization in Pittsburgh that does, I didn't realize it was called citizen diplomacy, but there's an organization called Global Pittsburgh that does the same thing. It's very fun to like host a dinner of international diplomats at your home or have like a short homestay of international visitors. Just to elaborate a little more on that, working with immigrants, like there's so many cool things you can do from the resettlement agencies that like meet people at the airport, teach people how to ride a bus, like solicit donations to furnish an apartment, help people read their mail. Like there's so many like cool volunteer opportunities you can do with refugees and immigrants, and they just like kind of run the gamut. There's another like local global thing that students can get involved in Pittsburgh, and it's something that if it doesn't exist in your city, you could start something. But my organization, the Global Switchboard, we help people collaborate for action. So I provide backbone support to an organization called the Human Rights City Alliance in Pittsburgh, and they use human rights, like I said before, to advocate for local issues. I'll try not to make this too long, but the United Nations has a new permanent forum on people of African descent. And they commissioned this study that is, the nickname is the George Floyd study, but they basically came to America and they were like, what's going on with policing in America? And a report just came out a couple weeks ago, and they went to a bunch of different cities, collected data. So in Pittsburgh, local advocates went to our city police, our county jail, and got a bunch of data, and we sent it to the UN. And the UN, got everybody's data and put it in a report. Now the report is out, and we're going to take that report and take it to the city council and take it to the county council and be like, look what the UN said. This is what we're supposed to be doing. And so it's a cool, practical application of international affairs stuff at a local level that, I think some of the like either getting like working with immigrants or like working with like cross-cultural foreign aid is like not obvious, but this is like sort of the maybe reverse of that.
I would also add, and the opportunities are a lot fewer in the areas I'm about to talk about, but also add, depending on the size of your city, there are consulates, right? I mean, if you're in DC, you have embassies, great. But and they often use local interns. And let me tell you, you're going to learn a lot. And if you have some connection to that country, if you're of, I don't know what, Brazilian heritage, it will be easier to get an internship there. And then also many cities have sort of the equivalent of kind of chambers of commerce, like the French American Chamber of Commerce of New England. Go get an internship with them, or at a minimum, go to their events, and you will get plugged into business trends on a global scale. So
wonderful.
David, I'll throw one more out there too. I just, as far as networks go too, I think another great way to get engaged is kind of change maker, social entrepreneurial development to bridge those issues. I'm just going to put this in the chat. There are about 20 plus chapters of Impact Hub around the country. They work everything through the UN Sustainable Development Goals and really help bridge that gap of local to global. So just want to, before I forgot, throw that one in there too.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask, I'm going to skip a question, ask a different one. What skills do younger professionals need to be successful in the global space? Because I'm considering all three of you to be young professionals, but younger than yourselves. What skills would be needed to be successful in the global local space, and what could advisors in our audience do to support the development of these skills, especially if there are limited resources, limited access? Any ideas?
I'll jump in. Hopefully not obvious, but language skills give you a huge leg up. And I'm saying that as a person who took a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of French. I'm not fluent in another language, but if you can get fluent in another language, that is just a huge skill set. And if you are, like, depending where you're oriented towards, like, don't be afraid to become fluent in like a niche language. Like, don't be afraid to have it be, Swahili, or have it be Nepali, or like it doesn't have to be like the bigger languages, because if you have like an immigrant community, sometimes you have people from that community who can be interpreters, but sometimes it's really nice to have someone not in the community be an interpreter, because then you're not going to gossip to your uncle or whatever about whatever is happening. Professional interpreters are trained not to do that, but sometimes there's just like a hesitation. So definitely language skills. And other thing that came to mind for me was just being aware of foreign affairs, like keeping, like I spent my early career in Zambia and Southern Africa, and I keep up with like BBC Africa or whatever it is, like whatever your news source is, like have a general sense of geography and like the kind of awareness of the world. It's not something you should jump into just because you're like a do-gooder or because it's a shiny, exciting thing. It's like you have to actually do the homework, and that's why a degree in international affairs. But even if you're not gonna do the degree, like being able, like having someone bring up a conflict and at least what it is really helpful.
Thank you. Mary, Tyler.
I was thinking about this, and it seems to me there's kind of two areas of skills. One is how to get the job, and then one is how to do well when you're in it. And obviously the second one is a lot bigger. So certainly language skills can be exciting and can get you in the door. Also, if you so I totally agree with Holly. And if you possibly can do an exchange somehow, somewhere, do it, because I've seen over and over again people who have lived overseas, even if they're put into a third culture, not the one that they're from, not the one where they did their exchange, they have the mindset, they have the habit of sort of cultural adaptation. So if you possibly can, it's going to change you in ways you never thought about before. It makes you a better manager and team leader too back home. But once you get into the job, I was really thinking about this. I don't believe that the skills are that much different from just work, and then those skills are going to change over time as you proceed in your career. But initially, we all know this great person. Just be useful. What needs to be done, do that. And don't get too lost in your own private job description. Certainly don't poach on other people's territory, but the more that you can think about the overall success of the organization and where to fill in the gaps, the better you'll do, So I think that's true anywhere you work.
I just plus one the experiential learning. I just think that's such a fantastic opportunity. Holly, this might tee you up a little bit, but I think any sort of kind of positioning for fellowships and to kind of explore that outlook while you're in school, international affairs, international development is just an amazing bridging. I know when I was in grad school, I worked at a capstone project in Belize, working with the Maya people. Before that, with the Mahuna people in Peru, just changed my trajectory of what I want to do, where I position myself. And that's where I think the last thing I'd say from a skills side is really a focus on some of these, what folks may consider soft skills, but this important relevance of being a facilitator learning human-centered design, because I think oftentimes we're directed to kind of take charge, whether it's local or global, and sometimes that can come off as bulldozing when you enter a space to understand that you aren't the central repository of information. You're there to learn and help guide. That is such an important lesson, and the earlier you learn that in this type of work, the better you'll be for your long side of your career.
And I think that just made me think of another thing, Tyler, that, regarding soft skills and hard skills. When we're in school, we think a lot about hard skills, like, oh God, I better take, whatever it is, macro or cost accounting, or I don't know what. And, that's important. But the hard skills fade very fast. I assure you they will be different in 3 years. But soft skills, man, you got to keep polishing those up and acquiring them throughout your whole career. So, if you got a C in, I don't know, whatever, finance or something, you can go back and learn more about that later. But those soft skills will distinguish you. Your ability to work in teams, your ability to empower other people to get stuff done. That's just ageless.
I want to jump in and add one or two more things. I don't know if maybe this is a soft skill, and I think people can learn it, but humility, like the cultural humility is so huge. And I'm sure, Mary and Tyler, that you've seen people in your fields who don't possess this, but it's such a cringeworthy moment when you're in a meeting and someone comes in with kind of like a superiority or a paternalism or a white savior kind of thing. And so that's really important. And Tyler talked about keying me up. I don't think I said this in the big group yet, but I used to be an undergraduate advisor. So, and I worked in an honors college as a community engagement advisor, but I helped people apply for Peace Corps and Fulbright and things like that. So later I can take questions if that's helpful. And also, side note, I did my master's in public policy while doing that job. So I'm also here to recruit you guys to become, to come on this side. But your job is also very important. But yeah, the humility piece, when I was teaching and advising, mentoring students, it was so important for me for them to know, to read about white savior complex, even if they're not white. It's like this American paternalism thing. It's so not cool to like either go into another culture or another country and assume that like, oh, I'm from the best country in the world, and so I'm going to teach you what to do. It's like we have to recognize that we have more to learn from other cultures than we have to teach. And I think that's a big thing for students too. Like students can go to another place and come back to their local community and be like, oh, there's a better way to do this because I learned it in, I learned it in Belize, or I learned it in Finland, or whatever. It's like we can actually grow our communities by learning about other communities.
Wonderful. And I know that I skipped over asking you about your own backgrounds, but I'm glad that each of you has brought a little bit of that into the conversation. And I promised our audience that we would open up questions to them around 4:35. So I'm going to throw one last question out there and then open it up. So that question would be, with all the ways that people can channel the desire for change into their profession, why should they choose public service and international affairs? Why should our advisors in the audience be promoting this as a career path? Holly, you are unmuted, so I'm going to throw it to you.
I've been reflecting on this question, coming into this this discussion today. I definitely support, these kind of degrees and these kind of programs. I think that, the content is definitely worth it. The piece of paper, I think, is like the reason I got my degree. So I worked in international development and higher ed for about 10 years before I got my master's in public policy. And for me, that personal choice for me was because I could not see a way to advance my career without having that on my resume. and that's why I did it when I was deciding to do it. But in hindsight, like the kind of connections that you get from being in, it's like almost not just about the content, but it's about like the networking. You're with other people who care about these things. And at GISPIA, where I went in Pittsburgh, like it was like there were the bleeding heart do-gooders, and there were the, national security, former military people with kind of like a different orientation. And it was great to kind of just be around people from different perspectives. So I feel like just being around like people who are driven to make the world a better place and learn about these things in a holistic way, I feel like it's just a great community to be a part of.
Thank you. Tyler, Mary. I can repeat the question.
No, I remember the question. Also thought about this one, and I have to say, I actually don't really know. I think it's like being a chef or playing the violin. You just sort of have to. I knew really early on that I was fascinated by maps and languages and different food and traveling and all these things. So my career was first of all about trying to figure out how to land. In my case, it was in Russia, and then I accumulated skills, over time to be useful. And then my subsequent career has not been particularly related to Russia. Fortunately, it's heavily involved in international affairs. But I think it's kind of just the taste that you have. Some people don't like bananas. I don't know. Hard to explain. And so what the career counselors I have heard often talk about is there's kind of a Venn diagram between your abilities, your preferences or desires, and what the opportunities are out there. And then I guess finally, as for sort of nonprofits or public service, which can exist, obviously in a non-international context, to me, I mean, I'm a recovering MBA. I worked in an investment bank. I think ultimately that's a little boring. I like having a big high flown mission, as long as there's also some metrics to work with. So that sounds like nonprofit work, to me. I think you can do great work in the for-profit sector. I think you can be incredibly helpful and effective. But, if you don't particularly like, almonds, why force yourself to eat them?
I love that, Mary. You hinted on the diagram. I was just going to put in here kind of the Japanese concept of ikigai, of kind of like that vocational. I mean, this is something I chased all the time when I was looking for my in the chat there. Let's see. I think it loaded. I just kind of this overlap of your passion, your skills. I think that's just such a wonderful aspect of international affairs. And I think I think we've touched on this earlier. What is it? 80% of jobs are expected do not exist in the next 3 years. Millennials, Gen Zs, upwards of 70% want to make a difference in their career choice. I think those overlays with a local to global context is why everyone's here, and why this is so important work, because we want to try to make a meaningful difference in the world, in our communities, but also in ourselves. And so I'll end on that one. And I know we're chatty, David, so I'm sorry we're
going over. But can I add one more thing? Many, if there's undergraduates on the line or even graduate students, a couple of you will go to space. And that, like, if I were starting all over again, that's where it's at. Any dimension that you want to look at, law, technology, music, agriculture, it's all going to be profoundly affected by what we do in space and how we interact with other countries, because it really hasn't been thought through. So when Elon Musk builds a hotel on Mars, and some terrorists come and capture the guests or something, who's going to look after that? How are we going to handle it? So space, I don't know. I feel like the old guy in the movie The Graduate, plastics, but I think space is a very thrilling way to engage with international concepts.
So, Mary, I'm going to steal your line about being a recovering MBA. I love
Okay.
that.
Okay.
But also, I get all these
Hang in
references
there.
where Carmen has said space, the next frontier, very Star Trek-y. And then, of course, plastics from The Graduate. I remember that movie. But we have now reached the point where I am soliciting questions from the audience, but I don't have any. So we are now going to go back into your careers and ask you, what are you glad you did? And what do you wish you had done? So the good and the aspirational.
I wish I had done something more immersive, like what Mary and Tyler brought up about kind of advice to give, because I mentioned I speak French and Spanish very poorly. I also, like, while I was in Zambia, learned like greetings in local languages, but never really like my Nyanja is one of the main trade languages there, and I can get by, but it's like I never really focused on that pure immersion. I had chosen my undergraduate college because they had a really high participation in study abroad, but it was a trick. It was like they send all sophomores abroad for like 2 weeks, and so I never got it together. To apply for a real immersive study abroad program, and so I really wish I would have done that. Can I add something I wish I didn't do? This is not so much about what I didn't do, but I think I would really caution people about doing short-term service trips. That, like, the very shallow, I think there's ways to do it that are educational and not harmful, but it's just a really, really dicey territory. And I know people are still putting that kind of stuff on their resume, but if you're going to have an international experience, not opposed to it being service, but just really vet the organizations that you're going with and make sure that, you know, the local communities have say over whether or not you're there, and like what the projects are, and that you really take time to like listen and try local things. And yeah, so that's something that I'm like, I did learn something from it, but I think there's better ways of going about it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Plus one to that, Holly, I mean, just so there's so many amazing alternatives to that. I mean, that time, I think there are ways to work for organizations that are community owned. But at least to that point, I just want to add a little bit more on the experiential learning. I think just such a vital piece. I joked when I was in grad school, one professor I remember said, well, Tyler, I'm impressed you did as well as you have in this international economic development class. You've been in Poland and Czechia for all this semester. But I think the professors and staff were so supportive of that. I really tried to take, I was for COP26 in Katowice, Poland, through the University Coalition. Amazing opportunity. I never would have been there through the university on that. I had the opportunity to do a fellowship with the Global Arena Research Institute in Prague. That was an opportunity supported by staff and faculty, and even helping support costs to travel for that. And I just think those are so crucial points to get there, because it's different to what Holly was talking about. A lot of those experiences, you're working, collaborating with and for a team, and learning the culture and differences there on your terms. And on the community's terms, versus being a outside visitor to kind of be extractive. And I think that's just so important. So I just wanted to double up on what Holly said.
Yeah, I guess something I'm grateful for is I was an expat in Moscow for a total of 8 years at 2 different times. And I learned a lot about, in a sense, how you cannot actually fully merge. You know, your upbringing is always going to be with you, and there's all kinds of cool diagrams about that and stuff. But essentially, I was living as a professional. You know, I was working for a bank, and half my colleagues were Russian and half were, you know, from somewhere else. and we didn't talk a lot about like what it is to be Russian or what it is to be, but it's like the weather, it's all around you. It's very present. So I was very lucky to be able to do that, and it was very formative for me. And I have no business, I assure you, working in an investment bank. I am like the least numeric person ever, but you know, I had an MBA and I spoke fluent Russian, and they were like, "Eh, go ahead, help, you know, we need people." So it was, you know, the culture took me to an incredible opportunity. So very different from trying to come and, you know, sort out what's going on in a small town and make it better for them, whatever. I mean, we're all, you know, working for this bank, for example.
Yeah. I wanted to add, so when I returned to Pittsburgh, my job was, you know, I spent time abroad. I returned to Pittsburgh and worked in community engagement and higher ed. It wasn't specifically focused on anything global, although I did help students connect with volunteering with immigrants and refugees, things like that. But what I really recommend, and I love recommending this to young people, but serve on a nonprofit board.
Absolutely.
Nonprofit boards are always looking for people. Like, we're really looking for like bodies and seats, and but also like people who are ready to give advice. But we really need that cross-generational thing, because people think of boards as being like these wealthy old white men, which some are, but they don't have to be. And just like when I've been recruiting people for my board, they're like, "Oh, I don't have money," or "Oh, I don't have experience." It's like, no, I want you. That's why I'm asking you. But just to empower undergraduates that they can, you know, they can go on to like look at a nonprofit in your town, like whatever you're interested in, and just fill out the thing. You know, sometimes they have a separate youth advisory board, but like I know nonprofits in Pittsburgh that have college students on the real board. And so I feel like that's kind of like a secret kind of thing that people don't know about. And even you guys, the advisors, you can do that too. the nonprofits you approach will be so grateful to be like, "Yay, I'm a board member." And it's not a huge, like some boards only meet quarterly, like 4 meetings a year, and some meet every month, and sometimes it's more work than others. But it's a great networking opportunity. It's great on your resume, and you just learn so much. Like, you learn how a nonprofit works.
Wonderful. So thank you so much. I'm going to throw one last question out there, and I'm going to say, where do you see the next stage for your career? Are you happy where you are? Are you looking to do other things? Are you going to serve on boards? Are you going to practice what you preach? What would be a next step for each of you? Besides space, Mary, we're not going to give you that.
I mean, I think I missed the bus on that, but oh well.
I've only been in my position for a year. And I right now I'm a staff of 1, and I'm kind of excited about growing my organization, and the fact that I'm a staff of 1, and we went through a little bit of a transition before I came, like COVID, we got a new mission statement and things like that. It feels like a really great opportunity to build something. And so I feel like I'm at the beginning of something. And so call me back and see, you know, in a couple of years, and see how it's going. But that's I'm not looking for new things besides like getting some grants and like getting some staff.
I can jump in real quick. I've been with CRF for 4 years, and I've loved the journey because they've let me wear them down a little bit to kind of build out my work portfolio of things that I'm passionate about. I help lead our kind of rural development strategy, as well as our climate justice strategy, which is something I'm just very passionate about. In a perfect world for me, and I think is a challenge for everyone, is trying to push all your passions and what kind of is that's the next journey. That's always on the horizon. And so for me, I've moved more to the domestic realm, but I still get a lot more of that international passion through, to Holly's point, I sit on a small board called the Minnesota International NGO Network. And I think as I look to my career, I just kind of bridging and uniting those under kind of a giant umbrella of social impact. That's what always keeps me energized. And it's never ending, right? So that's what I love about it.
I mean, for me, I'm overemployed. There's like a million things that I want to do here. It's my second dream job. I had a dream job, whatever it was, 25, 30 years ago. And now I'm in my second dream job. And I feel that in the sector, indeed society, that, you know, if we can manage to keep ourselves from exploding, whether metaphorically or physically, I am seeing around me just another kind of explosion, an explosion of creativity post COVID. I mean, we all had a lot of time to do some thinking, and, you know, how to do things differently, what we really want to do. So many people have shifted jobs. Not at all surprised to hear that, you know, one of you came up with like a new mission statement, whatever. We did some of that too. So if we can just keep I was going to use a bad word, if we can just keep ourselves together, I think this is a very, very innovative, exciting time. But you know, in the short run, let's be real, my passion may take me to shorter term concerns in the political or international arena, because I may determine that they're so urgent. I gotta work on that stuff. How was that for diplomatic?
Outstanding. So I'm going to open it up for one last ask for questions, but not seeing any. I think we will get to the wrap up, in which I'm going to thank each of our speakers. Holly, Mary, Tyler, amazing, great information. I'm glad this is recorded, because this needs to be part of training for advisors to talk to their students about these opportunities and how they can take global issues and make them local, and local issues and make them global. So there is an evaluation poll that I believe is going to be sent out. You should be getting that. Please, in the audience, fill that out. It's very important to get your feedback. There it is. Panelists, you do not need to fill that out. I don't believe so. And then I wanted to make sure that each of you in the audience is aware that there is another session tomorrow. And please, you're invited back for the Thursday session titled, What APSIA and the PISA Network Can Do for You. And again, I'm going to continue thanking the panel. Amazing information, great pointers. Your careers are wonderful, what you've done already and what you're going to be doing.
Thank you, David.
Thanks a lot. I want to meet all of you in real life sometime. So until then,
meet at Carmen's house.
There we go. Thanks, Carmen, for inviting us over.
Yeah.
That's great. Really appreciate it.
I want to meet at Carmen's parents' house in Pittsburgh.
I'll bring a casserole.
Well, I want to add my thanks to everybody's. I always love when topics come full circle. Our career speakers yesterday talked about humility and teamwork and cultural adaptability as key skills in their professions. And I love that we've talked about how that can live in doing global work on the local level. So thank you all so much. Brittany, we can stop recording, and advisors, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.